All right, now we're going to start with a primitive shape by simply hovering over this button here. And this is the Add 3D Shape button. When I click it, you'll see a number of shapes. I can make a capsule. And if I turn on my gizmo, I can move it out of the way. And you can start to see I can just drop whatever shape I want in here. I can add a sphere. I'll move that out of the way. I can drop a cube. So you can see I can start to build things simply with these primitive shapes. Now the interesting thing is when you see this, this gizmo, it moves up and down, left and right. Oops. But I can also scale with it by simply holding Shift, and then I can scale my primitive shape. If I hold Shift and Control, it actually will stretch the object. So you can, maybe make a capsule out of this. You can stretch this capsule up, and you can see that I can start to make all sorts of different shapes with that. Of course, I can always undo things as I go. Now, one thing to keep in mind is when you're starting to build things, make sure that you keep them in folders. I'm going to click a folder here, and I'm going to take my cube, my sphere, and my capsule and put them in a folder. That way they're safe and they don't get lost. Okay, so I've got my cube, my sphere. We're going to get rid of those right now and just focus on the sphere. So I'm going to hide my capsule, and I'm going to hide my cube, and I could turn on and off my sphere as required. And now we'll put the sphere there. We'll put it where we want. Great. Happy with that. Perfect. I have it where I want it. Now I'm going to scale it up just a bit. And you'll notice that it's not round anymore, so I'm going to fix that. And I've got my somewhat round sphere. Perfect. There we go. Okay. So I've got a sphere, and I'm going to start to add textures to it. So if you'll notice, when I click the sphere, I can actually click up here and I can move it around. I can position it, maybe move it left and right. I can move it up and down, and on any axis back and forth, right? So what we'll do is we'll just put it all at 0, 0, 0. And that's a quick way of putting everything at 0 to make sure that it's where you want it. Okay, so you can pivot it and scale it as well. So I can make this, let's say 2, 2, and 2. There's my sphere. Next tab over, I can actually rename it from here, so I can call it spherical, and that will rename it over here in my assets and my scene folder as well. Next one over, I can also turn that on and off simply here or here. Next tab over, I have the texture files, and you'll see an inspector window pull up for the textures, and textures are really cool, so I can start to do things like change the color. Right. I can change the emissive, which is literally like lighting it up. Imagine there was a light inside of it and it was emitting light. That's what this does. And if I actually align them both as red, this is now a really bright glowing red ball. But we're not going to do that for now. We're just going to keep this as white. You can also change the roughness settings. So for example, I can make it super rough, meaning it has, kind of no reflection of lights, or I can make it, as I scale back, you'll see it's starting to get more and more smooth, and you'll start to see a reflection in there, and as I go all the way, it becomes a mirror, and you can see the reflection. And if I click the world control in the top left, you'll notice that it's reflecting real time the Skybox. So we have PBR, like I said before, physically based rendering, and that allows you to take a physical representation of the world around you and drop it on as a reflection, and this gives a really nice realism to the effect. You can also change that by simply dropping different skyboxes in, and I'll show you that now. So I'm going to bring in another skybox. I'm going to drop it into Skybox. Now I can go to my Skybox. I can take my new sunrise, drop it into Skybox in the world controller. And now my sphere is reflecting real time the skybox around me. I can also turn off the skybox and just have the reflection real time. And of course, as I change those, it does it automatically. So we'll put back the original one, and we'll click the sphere, we'll click its textures, and I'm going to turn the roughness down to normal again. You have metalness, normals, opacity. So let's look at what those things do. All right. And drop those in there so they don't get lost. Perfect. So now I'm going to add textures, and I'm going to start with adding the roughness. And if you notice, I add the roughness here and it automatically creates a roughness texture map on the sphere. You'll notice that it's all different, going from kind of really rough here, and it's almost like a pattern material, to kind of a scratched material here, very shiny, almost metallic. This looks kind of rough, and each one of these is different, and you'll notice it quickly here as I get going. I'm also going to add the normals. I'm going to delete the roughness, add the normals, and you'll notice these shapes show up here. And what that does is it adds shadows, and it makes it look super realistic. And the whole idea with that is that you're adding shadows, and of course it's just a texture file. It's not really adding any shape to the sphere. It just adds a file to make it look like it does that. Okay, I'm going to add my metalness. Metalness won't do too much to this, but it will in the final product. And then the last one is albedo, which is colors, right? And so I've got like a fabric color, a wood-looking color, just gray, like rock maybe. But now what we're going to do is we're going to add all the textures together. I'm going to add the metalness. Okay, it doesn't do much. I'm going to add the normals. Gives me that kind of bumpy shape here. And then when I add the roughness, you'll see it come to life. All right, so now I've got my sphere. Looks super realistic. I've got my fabric on top. You'll notice the fabric pattern. I've got my wood grain here, my metal, concrete, obsidian, and copper on the bottom. And so you can see how texture files work with the primitive shapes. And of course I can do this with anything. I can add another sphere in here, right? I can go to the sphere, I can move it out of the way, I can scale it up, right? And then I'll just simply add the roughness, the metalness, normals, and albedos, and now you've got another one. Another way of doing that would be adding a sphere. Okay, I can add a sphere here, right? And I'll make it, scale it up so we can have it side by each. Another way to do it is simply grab this sphere, control copy, and then paste it. And it will paste all the attributes from object to object so you don't have to go one by one. That's very handy when you have multiple objects and you just need to get them done. Now, for example, if I grab this one and I deleted everything off of it, and I made it shiny and red, I could then grab that, copy, paste, and it would paste those attributes directly to the other spheres. So it's very handy to do that. Make sure you keep your objects in folders. There we go. And there you go. There's primitive shapes. You can add any shape you want. Icosahedron. You know, if you're so inclined, you can add an icosahedron. And of course, I can grab the texture from that and paste it as well. And now I've got it in my scene. Of course, I can rotate it as well using the rotate tool by simply grabbing it and freeform rotating. Or I can grab one of the directions, X, Y, and Z. Okay, so there you go. There's an introduction to primitive shapes. Now, what we're going to look at next is how to create shadows.